can understand, I can maybe relate to that, or maybe I can't relate to that, but I can also listen and try to empathize in those situations and say, what can I do to support you? All I wanted to do was make $1 million. That's it. That money was the motivating factor. The sooner I could get out of college, the sooner I could get a job, the sooner I could get a paycheck, I was going to start that journey. You have to set personal goals for yourself, and they don't have to be financial goals. They could be, health goals, right?
Dalen, I'm so excited to be diving in with you today. I kind of think back, we've known each other for a few years now, and I'm thinking back to, I can remember when we first had our conversation, kind of an intro of getting to know each other a little bit. And in that, you were in the middle of a transition in part of your journey, right? And you told me your story, and I'm just excited to work through a little bit of that with you today, and in the end, get to your definition of success, which is, why we're on the Engineered Success podcast, talking through what that means for you and your journey. So, but before we get to that, I want to take a step back and really dive into, your childhood, kind of how did this journey start for you, Dalen?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was a very unique start to the journey. I grew up in a extremely poor family. My dad wasn't around a lot. He was a pretty severe alcoholic. So I really didn't have a father figure around as much as I should have. My mother had a very bad chemical imbalance. And back then, mental health wasn't talked about as much as it is today. So growing up, what I can remember, and I tried to hide a lot of that over the years, to be honest with you, and work has kind of been my therapy to mask a lot of that. But it was tough. I remember some of my earliest memories of going to a church and getting food stamps. That was some things I remember, or the car not starting and being late for school because we always had cars that just weren't reliable. Going to the gas station and my mom getting gas and having to pay for that would change. And, and my mom did the best she could. She did the best she could on terms of trying to make life normal. On the Friday night, we'd go to get a movie, and that's when you could actually rent VHSs, and that was at gas stations. And we'd get popcorn and we get, red vine licorice. And but I just remember at an early age watching her pay for all those things would change. And the people behind us being so impatient, everybody's so busy and it's such in a rush, and seeing their looks on their faces. So those are the kind of memories that I've had in my earlier childhood. But those memories also have made me who I am today.
Yeah, definitely. And I can bet that some of those opportunities that you had, those experiences really taught you some skills that, later in life, you're like, oh, I wish I didn't learn them maybe in that way, but I'm glad that I have them. Curious to dive a little bit deeper. You mentioned a little bit about your parents, and thanks for sharing some of that. Tell me a little bit about the rest of the family. Like, where were you located? Were you in Michigan? Did you have brothers and sisters? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I have an older sister, Amber, and then I have a younger sister, Angel, and we grew up in Ferrysburg.
Okay.
There's a trailer park there close to Lake Michigan. So I lived there until 7th grade. And so after 7th grade, we moved to Spring Lake. So I spent a lot of my early childhood in a trailer park, which, to be honest with you, was probably one of the most positive experiences because you always have a lot of kids to play with. And so there was never a time where you couldn't find somebody that wanted to ride bikes or do something. So that was probably one of the better experiences. Or, when it got hot out, North Shore Beach is right down the road. So you could get on a bike, you could walk right to the beach. So those are some of the more positive experiences I had when I was younger.
Yeah, able to spend time outdoors, build that relationships with, some of the friends. Now, did you go to Ferrysburg schools as well, or where'd you go to school?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So my grandparents were very big parishioners at St. Mary's Catholic School. And so they were very adamant about us getting a Catholic education and going through that process. So I always find this very funny joke that I have, but whenever I go to school somewhere, all the way from elementary school, I've always probably been the poorest kid in those situations all the way up to college. And so it was very interesting when the bus came to pick us up at the trailer park and kids are like, oh, you live in there? It's like, but at an early age, that's all normal, that's fine. Yeah, that's where I live, type of thing. So you ended up having to answer a lot of questions at an early age that you don't understand why you're answering.
Yeah, I could definitely see that and how that's, maybe put a little bit of a pep in your step. And, I've had some of these conversations, and that's probably fueled some of your rest of your journey as you dove into the next phases of life. So take me beyond, the time you spent at the trailer park in Ferrisburg. You're growing up, you're getting into the college years. Kind of what did that look like for Dalen?
Yeah, I mean, it when you say fuel, it's fuel. It's not 87 octane, it's rocket fuel. I mean, that has been the driving factor in my career, all the way from college to essentially where I am today. It's something that I do think about on a regular basis, even in terms of going to the gas station. That's something that, I don't take very lightly. I always fill up my gas tank, but when I'm pumping gas, those earlier childhood memories still resonate every single time, believe it or not. And so, but even through college, I wanted to graduate as quickly as possible. I made sure I graduated in 4 years. I had a job lined up before I even graduated. All I wanted to do was make $1 million. That's it. That money was the motivating factor. The sooner I could get out of college, the sooner I could get a job, the sooner I could get a paycheck, I was going to start that journey, and as quickly, as fast, and work as hard as I possibly could.
So you had an early external motivator of money, and that probably came from some of your past, right?
Yes.
And then wanting to find a solution for that. What were some of the early ways you said you wanted to get a job, or you had a job lined up and you wanted to get that $1 million? What are some of the ways that you worked at early on to get that financial kind of success?
Yeah. Well, I've always worked. I remember my first job, my first W-2 job was at Lepping's in Ferrisburg, Lepping's grocery store. And I would go in there after football practice. My dad would have to drive me because I didn't have a license. I think at that time you could get a job at 14 years old. So I would get done with football and he would drive me there, and I'd work till they closed, and I'd go home and I'd do my homework. But I don't remember a time in my life since 14 that I didn't have some sort of job. So that was always, even prior to graduating college and really wanting to go out there and make good money, I always was money driven, motivated, and it didn't matter if I had to shovel ditches. It didn't matter if I had to cut grass. I always wanted to have some kind of income stream coming in. And in my mind, that was stability, even at an earlier age.
Yeah, stability. And when you're 14, it's sometimes hard to get up and work that job when you've got school and things like that going on as well. When you think back, like what you mentioned money, but what got you up? What got you to perform at that job? What were some of the things that you look back and you're like, that's something a mindset that I had that pushed me into achieving at that level?
Yeah, I think that essentially when you grow up as poor as we did, it can be a cycle. And so I think that subconsciously, I earlier on wanted to break that cycle. I didn't want to go through the trials and essentially tribulations that my parents went through that I saw on a daily basis. And it really was a daily basis. And so that was kind of the mindset, the motivation factor, and really the philosophy behind working at an early age and having that motivation to go out there. And I can't say that I was very good at saving back then, because as you're getting into your teenage years, you wanted a car and you wanted to get gas and you wanted to go out with your friends. So that was one of those situations where, you probably weren't financially smart in your journey at that point, but you also had money coming in, which was better than nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, as you're looking at that earlier path that you took, your journey, and what I've realized is that there's some of these things at each different stage or season that we're in where we're making decisions. We could go left or we could go right. And when we look back, we're like, wow, I'm really glad that I went right versus left. Were there any phases or forks in the road when you look back at those years that you're like, I'm glad that I took that route and didn't go this one?
Yeah. Well, once again, a great question. I think that the routes that I've taken, I'm very happy that I've taken. Not saying that they were always the right path or the right decisions, but I've learned from everything, good or bad. I've taken it and tried to really develop and understand. Do I look back and say, should I have veered right when I veered left? Absolutely. I still have that to this day. I still have things I look back on and say, you know what, you really probably should have turned around and went backwards, to be honest with you, instead of going right or left. But once again, that makes us who we are as a person. And I think, everybody's journey, everybody's backstory is different. And that's what makes us extremely unique individuals, really.
So you're 14, working at Leppings, kind of doing the hustle. You're working hard. Obviously, you have a thing about you that you always need to be working, and
Yep.
you've definitely proven that over the years and over your journey. But even at a young age, now, was there anyone in your life, either at Leppings or in your family, that you would look back at and say, like, hey, they were someone that I went to at that age, that was a mentor or someone that could kind of guide you in a direction? You were learning about how to deal with money at that point. Was there anyone like that in your life at that age?
To be honest with you, no,
Yeah.
I really haven't. It's very interesting to look back, and I've seen so many bad choices, within my family, but really outside of my family as well. I always had a keen knack of realizing that this isn't right. It doesn't look right. It doesn't smell right. It doesn't feel right. And saying, maybe you should really analyze the situation. Perfect example. And to this day, I'm extremely proud, in terms of credit card debt, right? I have credit cards. I use them for my advantage, reward points, cash back, but they're paid off at the end of the month. I got my first credit card in college. And I think a lot of people that are younger get credit cards because you go to college, you go to universities, and what's the first thing you see? All those booths, right? Sign up for a credit card, $1,500, $500. And you're thinking, well, free money, free money. Even at that point, I knew when I graduated, I needed a credit score, and I think that's one thing that I saw my family struggle in terms of getting a new vehicle. We never had new vehicles. We never had stable vehicles. Every vehicle we've ever owned growing up was something that broke down consistently. And so it was one of those situations where, looking back at it, I literally looked at every one of those situations, analyzed and said, you know what, I'm going to do something different. And really, I'm so proud that I did. And I used my credit card very sparingly or sparsely in college, but I always paid it off. And by the time I graduated college, I had a decent credit score. And in this world today, that means everything,
100%. And you were able to take what you experienced, what you saw around you, and said, hey, doesn't really seem like I want my future to look like. So you had to take that intentionality, you had to engineer that part of your journey of saying, I am not going to go into credit card debt because I know that this is going to affect my future. And I love that intentionality as part of it. Now, as you think through, were there any big aha moments, college years, things like that, where you got into something that happened, you're like, this clicks, this excites me, this is what I want my future to look like, that as you lean towards and into your journey of success?
I wish at an early age I would have had more of those aha moments, or really those, the bulb went off, right?